What happens when two of British television's most outspoken personalities clash over mental health, authenticity, and the pressures of fame? It only took 27 seconds for a friendly morning chat to explode into one of the most shocking confrontations ever witnessed on daytime television. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations the industry doesn't want you to see, and the moments that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling. Last night, on the Lorraine show, what was meant to be a lighthearted conversation about Ruby Wax's new mental health initiative quickly spiraled into a heated exchange that left viewers absolutely stunned. The comedian and mental health advocate, known for her brutally honest approach and sharp wit, found herself in an increasingly tense battle with host Lorraine Kelly that nobody could have predicted. Within minutes, the warm and welcoming atmosphere that Lorraine's show is famous for had completely evaporated, replaced by something far more raw and uncomfortable. What started as a discussion about helping people in the entertainment industry cope with mental health challenges somehow devolved into a bitter argument about authenticity, celebrity culture, and the very nature of advocacy itself. Ruby Wax arrived at the studio that morning in good spirits, ready to discuss her latest project, focused on mindfulness and mental health awareness in the entertainment industry. She had spent years building her reputation as someone who wasn't afraid to talk openly about her own struggles with depression and mental illness, turning her experiences into a platform for helping others. She greeted Lorraine warmly as she took her seat on the famous yellow sofa, exchanging pleasantries about the weather and commenting on how lovely the studio looked. The audience applauded enthusiastically, many of them familiar with Ruby's work and eager to hear what she had to say. The energy in the room was positive, expectant, friendly. Lorraine, always the consummate professional with decades of broadcasting experience, opened with her signature friendly smile and began with what seemed like straightforward questions about Ruby's work and the inspiration behind her new initiative. She asked about the workshops Ruby had been running, about the response from people in the industry, about the specific techniques and approaches she was using to help people manage their mental health. These were safe questions, comfortable questions, the kind that filled countless morning television segments without incident. For the first several minutes, everything proceeded normally. Ruby spoke passionately about the importance of mental health support for performers, about her own struggles with depression that had lasted years, about the darkest moments of her life when she couldn't see a way forward. She talked about the workshops she'd been running to help people in the industry cope with the unique pressures they face, the constant scrutiny, the fear of failure, the pressure to maintain a public image while privately falling apart. She described how the entertainment industry, despite being full of creative and sensitive people, often had a culture that discouraged vulnerability and honesty about mental health struggles. Lorraine nodded along, asking follow-up questions and sharing her own thoughts about the challenges of working in television, about the pressure to always be on, to always be upbeat and positive, regardless of what's happening in your personal life. The conversation flowed naturally, and the studio audience seemed engaged and supportive, nodding along and occasionally making sympathetic sounds at particularly moving moments in Ruby's story. But then Lorraine's questions took a turn that Ruby clearly wasn't expecting. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in tone, a change in the way questions were being framed. The host leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting from warm and supportive to something more probing and curious. Something that suggested she wasn't just facilitating a conversation anymore, but actively challenging it. Ruby, I have to ask, because I think a lot of our viewers might be wondering this, and I think it's important that we address it openly. You've been very open about your own mental health journey, which is wonderful and brave and I think has helped a lot of people. But some people, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but I think we need to acknowledge it. Some people have questioned whether celebrities talking about their struggles sometimes overshadows the experiences of ordinary people who don't have access to expensive therapy, private retreats, residential treatment centers, and all the support systems that fame and money can provide. What would you say to those critics who feel that celebrity mental health advocacy, while well-intentioned, might actually make regular people feel worse about their own situations? Ruby's smile faltered just slightly. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, and there was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. She took a moment before responding, clearly choosing her words carefully, trying to navigate what suddenly felt like a minefield. Well, Lorraine, I'd say that mental illness doesn't discriminate based on your bank balance or your level of fame. Depression doesn't care if you're a celebrity or working in a shop or unemployed. It affects everyone the same way. And actually, the pressure and scrutiny that comes with being in the public eye, with having your every move analyzed and criticized, can make things significantly worse in many ways. Yes, I have resources that not everyone has access to, and I'm grateful for that. But I've also faced challenges that most people never will. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. Having money doesn't make you immune to suffering. Lorraine nodded, but there was something in her expression that suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer. Her eyebrows raised slightly, and she tilted her head in that way interviewers do when they're about to push back on something. Of course, I completely understand that, and nobody's saying that fame makes you immune to mental health problems. But don't you think there's something a bit, performative about the way some celebrities approach mental health advocacy these days? Like it's become the fashionable cause to champion? A way to seem relatable and down to earth and in touch with ordinary people? It feels like every other celebrity has a mental health initiative, or podcast, or book these days. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the usual tone of a Lorraine interview at all. The show was known for being warm, supportive, uplifting. This felt different, almost confrontational. Ruby's posture stiffened noticeably, her back straightening against the sofa cushions, and her eyes narrowed just a fraction more. When she spoke, her voice had an edge that hadn't been there moments before. Are you suggesting that my work on mental health is performative, Lorraine? Because if you are, I need you to be clear about that. I've dedicated years of my life to this, invested my own money, my own time, my own emotional energy. I've been hospitalized. I've been to some very dark places that I wouldn't wish on anyone. This isn't a publicity stunt for me. This isn't me jumping on a bandwagon. This is my life. No, I'm not suggesting that about you specifically, Lorraine said quickly, though her tone didn't quite match the reassurance of her words. There was still that probing quality, that sense that she was pushing towards something. I'm just saying that there's been a lot of celebrity involvement in mental health recently, hasn't there? And some of it, not yours necessarily, but some of it does feel more about image management than genuine concern. And I think it's fair to question whether all of this celebrity advocacy is actually helping ordinary people, or whether it's just making them feel like their own struggles don't matter because they're not famous enough, or interesting enough to talk about them publicly. Ruby's jaw tightened visibly. She was quiet for a moment, and the silence stretched uncomfortably long. When she finally spoke, her voice had an edge to it that hadn't been there before. That's a hell of a thing to say, Lorraine, especially to someone who's sitting right in front of you, who's been working in this field for years, who's put her own reputation and privacy on the line to help people. You want to talk about performative? What about this? What about turning what should be a supportive conversation into an interrogation? Lorraine's smile remained fixed, but there was a hardness in her eyes now. I'm not interrogating you, Ruby. I'm asking questions that I think are legitimate, questions that reflect concerns people have. Isn't that what journalism is supposed to be about? Asking the difficult questions? Journalism? Ruby let out a short, bitter laugh. This is a morning chat show, Lorraine. You usually spend your time talking about recipes and fashion tips. Don't suddenly pretend you're Jeremy Paxman because you've decided to have a go at me about mental health advocacy. The atmosphere in the studio had completely changed now. The production team behind the cameras were exchanging worried glances. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether this was supposed to be entertaining banter or a genuine argument. Lorraine's famous composure was starting to crack, her smile becoming increasingly strained. "That's quite dismissive of the work we do here," Lorraine said, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions rose. "Just because we create a warm, welcoming environment doesn't mean we can't ask serious questions when they need to be asked. And I think there are serious questions about whether celebrity mental health advocacy is always as helpful as it claims to be." Ruby leaned forward in her seat, her voice rising. "You know what I think, Lorraine? I think you're jealous. I think you're threatened by people who are willing to be vulnerable and honest about their struggles because you've built your entire career on being relentlessly positive and cheerful. You've created this persona of the eternally upbeat morning show host, and anyone who dares to suggest that life isn't always sunshine and bloody rainbows is somehow suspicious to you." Lorraine's face flushed red. "How dare you? How dare you come on my show and make assumptions about me? You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through. Just because I don't broadcast my every personal struggle doesn't mean I haven't faced challenges. Then maybe you should talk about them," Ruby shot back. "Maybe if you were a bit more honest about the reality of life instead of maintaining this perpetual facade of cheerfulness, you'd understand why mental health advocacy matters. Why it's not performative to admit that things are hard sometimes. Why it's actually helpful for people to see public figures being honest about their struggles." The two women were both leaning forward now, the space between them crackling with tension. Lorraine's hands gripped the arms of her chair, and her trademark smile had completely vanished. "My show helps people, Ruby. We provide comfort and entertainment and a positive start to people's mornings. Not everything has to be heavy and intense and focused on problems. Sometimes people just need a bit of lightness in their lives." "Toxic positivity," Ruby said sharply. "That's what you're describing. Toxic positivity that makes people feel like they can't acknowledge when they're struggling because they should just be grateful and cheerful all the time. That kind of attitude is exactly what makes mental health problems worse. It's what stops people from seeking help because they think they should just be able to smile through it." Lorraine's voice rose to match Ruby's. "That's not what I'm saying at all." "You're twisting my words. I'm not saying people shouldn't talk about mental health. I'm questioning whether the way some celebrities talk about it is always constructive. Whether it's always coming from a genuine place, or whether it's sometimes more about maintaining relevance." "Maintaining relevance?" Ruby's voice hit a new pitch of anger. "You think I talk about the worst periods of my life? The times when I couldn't get out of bed? The times when I seriously considered ending everything just to stay relevant? You think I put myself through that for publicity?" The audience gasped audibly. Several people looked genuinely distressed by the turn the conversation had taken. Production assistants were now moving closer to the set, clearly preparing to intervene if necessary. Lorraine seemed to realize she'd pushed too far, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I think people in this industry do a lot of things for publicity, Ruby. I think sometimes the line between genuine advocacy and career management gets very blurred, and I think it's reasonable to question where that line is." Ruby stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making everyone in the studio jump. "I can't believe this. I genuinely cannot believe this. I came here to talk about helping people, about trying to make mental health support more accessible in our industry, and you've turned it into an attack on my character and my motivations." Lorraine remained seated, but her voice was firm. "I haven't attacked you, Ruby. I've asked you some challenging questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you're not as comfortable with honesty and vulnerability as you claim to be." "Oh, that's rich," Ruby said, her voice dripping with contempt. "That is really rich coming from you. You sit here in your perfectly lit studio with your carefully curated image, asking questions designed to make me look bad, and then you accuse me of not being comfortable with honesty? The hypocrisy is staggering. I think you should sit down, Lorraine said, her own composure clearly wavering now. We can discuss this calmly. No, Ruby said firmly. I don't think I should sit down. I think I should address what's really happening here. You invited me on your show under the pretense of discussing mental health advocacy, and instead, you've used it as an opportunity to undermine the work I do. To plant seeds of doubt in viewers' minds about whether any of this is genuine? That's not journalism, Lorraine. That's sabotage. Lorraine stood up as well now, facing Ruby across the coffee table. That's completely unfair. I'm raising legitimate concerns that people have. If you can't defend your work against reasonable scrutiny, that says more about you than it does about me. Reasonable scrutiny? Ruby's laugh was harsh and angry. Is that what you call this? Accusing me of being performative? Suggesting my advocacy is about staying relevant? You want to talk about what this really is? This is a woman who's built her career on being nice, attacking someone who's built their career on being real. And you can't stand it, because honesty threatens your entire brand. The veins in Lorraine's neck were visible now, her face flushed with anger and perhaps embarrassment at how this was unfolding in front of her audience and cameras. My brand? You want to talk about brands? Your entire persona is built on being the edgy, controversial truth-teller. Maybe this mental health advocacy is just the latest evolution of that brand. The latest way to position yourself as someone who's more authentic than everyone else. Ruby took a step back, shaking her head in disbelief. Wow. Just wow. I've dealt with a lot of skepticism over the years, a lot of people questioning my motives, but I never expected it from you. I actually thought you were one of the good ones, Lorraine. I thought you genuinely cared about these issues. I do care, Lorraine insisted, but her voice wavered slightly. I care enough to ask difficult questions, instead of just letting celebrities come on and promote their projects unchallenged. This isn't a project, Ruby's voice cracked with emotion. This is my life. This is me trying to use the worst experiences of my existence to help other people who are suffering. And you're treating it like it's a marketing campaign. Like it's something calculated and strategic, instead of something that comes from a place of genuine pain and a desire to make things better. Lorraine opened her mouth to respond, but Ruby wasn't finished. She was on a roll now, years of frustration and hurt, clearly pouring out. You know what the worst part is? People like you, with your massive platforms, could actually make a real difference in how we talk about mental health. You could use your show to normalize these conversations, to make people feel less alone, but instead, you choose to use it to tear down the people who are actually trying to do that work. Why? Because it makes for better television? Because conflict gets better ratings than support? That's not fair, Lorraine said, but her voice had lost some of its strength. I've had many guests on this show talking about mental health. I've always been supportive. Until today, Ruby said quietly. Until you decided that I was the right target for whatever point you're trying to make. And you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to stand here and defend my life's work to someone who's already decided I'm somehow fraudulent or opportunistic. Lorraine's expression shifted between anger and something that might have been regret. Ruby, please, let's just take a breath and— No, Ruby interrupted. I don't need to take a breath. I need to leave. This was supposed to be a conversation about helping people, and you've turned it into something ugly. I won't be part of that. She reached down and unclipped her microphone with shaking hands. The technical crew started to move forward, unsure whether to help or stay back. Ruby fumbled with the battery pack attached to her waistband, her frustration evident in every movement. You're really going to walk off? Lorraine asked, and there was something almost challenging in her tone. That's your response to a few difficult questions? Just leave? Ruby looked up at her, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, but filled with barely controlled anger. They weren't difficult questions, Lorraine. They were attacks disguised as questions. There's a difference. A good interviewer knows how to challenge someone while still respecting them. You've just spent the last 15 minutes trying to discredit everything I stand for. So, yes, I'm leaving. Because I have better things to do with my time than be your punching bag on live television. This is exactly the problem with people like you, Lorraine said, her own anger flaring back up. You claim you want honest conversations about mental health, but the moment someone questions you, you play the victim and run away. How is that helping anyone? Ruby finally got her microphone off and dropped it onto the sofa with more force than necessary. People like me? What does that mean exactly? People who've actually struggled? People who've done the work to understand mental health beyond a superficial level? People who aren't afraid to be real instead of maintaining some sanitized, marketable version of themselves? The entire studio was holding its breath. The audience members looked like they desperately wished they were anywhere else. Some were filming on their phones despite signs asking them not to. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of this spectacular breakdown of British television civility. Lorraine's voice went cold. You need to leave my show. Oh, I'm leaving, Ruby said, grabbing her bag from beside the sofa. Don't worry about that. But before I go, let me tell you something. This, right here, what you've done today, this is why people are afraid to talk about mental health. Because they're terrified that someone like you will use their vulnerability against them. Will question their motives, will suggest they're not really suffering, or that they have some ulterior agenda. You've just demonstrated perfectly why stigma still exists. That's not what I was doing, Lorraine protested, but her voice lacked conviction now. Yes, it is, Ruby said simply. That's exactly what you were doing. And the sad thing is, I don't think you even realize it. I think you've convinced yourself that you were just being a tough interviewer, asking the hard questions. But all you've actually done is make it clear that even on a supposedly supportive morning show, people can't talk honestly about mental health without having their integrity questioned. She started walking toward the edge of the set, her heels clicking loudly in the silent studio. Lorraine called after her, Ruby, please, let's talk about this properly, off camera. Ruby paused and turned back one final time. Why? So you can apologize in private while the public version of this conversation is me being interrogated about whether my mental health advocacy is genuine? No thanks. I think the damage is already done, don't you? I never said your advocacy wasn't genuine, Lorraine said, and now there was definitely a note of desperation in her voice. She seemed to be realizing just how badly this had gone wrong. You didn't have to say it directly, Ruby replied. You implied it over and over. You questioned whether celebrity advocacy is performative. You suggested people do it for relevance. You asked if it's really helping or just making people feel insignificant. Every single one of those questions was designed to plant doubt, and you did it all with that sympathetic expression on your face, like you were just concerned and asking fair questions. But they weren't fair, Lorraine. They were cruel. The two women stared at each other for a long moment. Lorraine looked like she wanted to say something, but whatever words she was searching for wouldn't come. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. I hope this was worth it, Ruby said finally. I hope whatever ratings boost you get from this confrontation is worth undermining the work that people like me are trying to do. Because that's what you've done today. You've given ammunition to everyone who wants to dismiss mental health advocacy as celebrity attention-seeking. Congratulations. With that, she turned and walked off the set, her back straight and her head held high despite the obvious emotion in her voice. The studio doors swung open, and she disappeared through them without looking back. The sound of them closing echoed through the silent studio. Lorraine stood alone on her set, the yellow sofa that usually represented warmth and comfort now looking oddly empty and cold. She turned to face the camera, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. The audience remained silent, nobody quite sure what to do or how to react. Some looked shocked, others uncomfortable, and a few seemed genuinely upset by what they'd witnessed. The host opened her mouth, as if to address the viewers, to somehow smooth over what had just happened, but no words came out. For once, the usually effortlessly charming Lorraine Kelly had absolutely nothing to say. The cameras captured it all. Her stunned expression, the empty seat across from her, the abandoned microphone on the sofa, and the studio doors through which Ruby Wax had just made her dramatic exit. What was supposed to be a friendly morning chat about mental health awareness had exploded into one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in British television history, leaving both women damaged and the viewers at home wondering how a conversation meant to help people had gone so catastrophically wrong.